Okay.
Okay, this is Grandpa David and Grandma Dorothy.
Stopsky.
David Stopsky, and the former lady known as Dorothy Lieberman. And we are doing a little question and answer session in order that future generations may know the stories of these second generation Americans.
Yes.
All right. Let's start with the earliest memories that you have of just being alive. And, you know, I remember that my first memory ever was pulling up to this house and jumping out of the car and seeing this tree. So with that in mind, I know it's a lot longer in the past, but what are your first memories of being alive?
Let me go first because I thought you wanted me to write it down, so I did write it down. I'm not sure whether this is a real memory or is what my mother told me. But when I was born, for a few years, my parents lived in 99th Street, the start of Harlem, which at that time was Jewish and had a lot of middle class and upper middle class Jewish people. My father had a butcher store, and my mother used to deliver some of the orders to the customers and wheel me in the carriage. Now, she's told me that, and I don't know whether that's my real first memory, but I will say my real first memory is when I was about 5 or 6 and Fritz was 3 or 4, and we were playing in the snow, and Fritz inadvertently or deliberately hit me with a shovel above my eye. And apparently I did have a little scar which disappeared. But that is my real, true memory. That was up in the Bronx on a street called Stebbins Avenue.
For the record, Fritz is Uncle Fred, Grandpa's brother.
Now, you lived in Harlem for how long before
I don't
you
think
moved?
it's more than 2-3 years tops. And then my father, they moved up to the Bronx, and my father always had a kosher butcher store.
And the store was the store in Harlem and then moved to the Bronx, or?
I don't know, he was just, he had the store and then he would move and then open another store.
Grandma, what about you?
Oh, we always lived in, I recall living in a cold water flat. And my mother had put the charcoal in the stove to cook. And one day she says, we're moving. And we moved to a real place with a bedroom and a bathroom. And I had my own room. And my brother was going to sleep on the couch. Then I discovered the room was going to be with a border. So I wasn't very happy about that. But at least it was an apartment with hot water and no more coal. We didn't have to bring up the coal. It's hard to believe, isn't it?
Wait, so that first apartment, where was that?
On Amboy Street in a cold water flat. My mother
What does that mean, a cold water flat?
they had a big black coal stove in it. And my mother had to bring up the coal from I don't know where and shovel it in the stove. And on that we cooked. And in that we heated the water. And I think we lived in one big room.
So there was no running hot water, is what
No.
you're saying? Okay.
No heat either, I guess.
No, from the stove, but we were always warm. And one thing we always had, no matter how poor, the refrigerator or the icebox had food in it. We were never hungry. And we were pretty poor, I think.
Tell her where Amboy Street was.
Amboy Dukes, you ever read about the heart of,
Tell me.
the heart of, what was it called?
Brownsville.
The heart of Brownsville, and where the, well, not the criminals, what were they called?
Well, there was a book written by an author called The Amboy Dukes. I think it was about criminals in that area.
Not really criminals.
What borough?
Was it Jewish criminals?
Yes.
Yeah.
Brooklyn.
Yes.
Not, they wouldn't murder, and they didn't really kill. They must have gambled, I don't know what they did. But what was that called? What were they called?
The Amboy Dukes.
The Amboy Dukes is a book.
That's the difference between the Jewish criminals and the black criminals. They
No, we
No,
didn't.
no, there were some real bad Jewish criminals in those days.
But they didn't kill, and you didn't
Yes,
do
they
that.
did. Some of them did. But, we were too young to know that.
And besides, we used to walk on the street, and there used to be the cop with the stick,
Billy
the
Stick.
billy stick. So we always were the same.
did the cops in that neighborhood and in both of your neighborhoods, did they keep the law and order? Were they like nowadays NYPD? You
They were perfect. I was really scared of them. When you saw he was an Irish big fat cop coming down with the billy club, it was quiet. It really was.
But it was safe. Our streets were safe. I can't complain about that.
But then my mother got a board and she stuck with me, so that's the way it was.
So there's room in your new apartment. So your first it was in the same neighborhood, basically.
Yeah, well, where else did all the Jews live?
Uh,
You just moved a block away. Part of the reason that people moved is because the landlord never painted and the landlord never put down new linoleum. So every time you moved, you got the chance to paint and to put down linoleum.
did you paint yourself when you
No,
moved,
we
or the
got-
new
My
landlord?
mother would say we got our paint there.
Also, what happened
Would come.
is because it was the Depression, the landlords needed tenants, so it would give some sort of incentive to the tenant. Come to my place, as Grandma says, I'll put some linoleum down, and you'll only have to pay X amount instead of what you're paying now. In other words, if you're paying $40, I'll make it $39. So people moved a lot.
What, $30? $18?
You're right. I'm
A
just
month?
giving a figure.
A month.
A month. Oh
Yeah.
man.
My father only made, I don't know what he made. In fact, there was an
And
interesting...
what did your father do?
My father was a hand tailor. You couldn't find anyone like him. He learned it in, I guess, in Russia. And he could mend a little seam. He worked for the finest suitors, who make clothes. If you had a little hole that you burned in your pants, he could fix it by hand that you would never know. So he worked for very expensive,
Worked for the Crawford clothes,
Yeah.
right?
that was
So, what about, we want to create some kind of living record of our ancestors who we've never met,
like my
like your father. But before that, we want to go even farther back and want to know where each of your families was from and what, if anything, stories you remember about the old country and your grandparents at all, if you knew them or if you knew stories about them.
I never knew my grandparents. They never came to America. So all I knew were my mother and father and my aunts. My mother had 3 sisters. My mother came from Galicia, which was part of Poland, part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And my father came from what he always called Kiev, which must have been some sort of suburb of Kiev in Russia. And they met here and they were married here. The only relatives I had were my aunts, Tante Manya and Tante Betty, and then later on there was another aunt who lived in Germany, Tante Bertha, who came over in the late 30s to escape Hitler.
Now, what would your parents tell you about their lives back in Russia and Poland? Would they ever?
They weren't good. That's why they came here. My father, I think, left because they were drafting people in, I guess, when he was 18 and 19 during World War I, and he left. And I think he once. My brother, I think, has a tape of him. I think he went through Romania, Turkey, and then somehow got a boat to America. My mother just used a regular thing where they took trains to Hamburg, Germany, and then they took the boat to America.
No planes, for the record, right?
Huh?
No one took. There were no planes.
No.
No way. Are you joking?
They used to travel in the steamers, and they used to live where the machinery was, and they used to sleep one on top of another.
That they call
In
steerage.
steerage.
Now, what about? Can we go back to your parents and where
My
they're
father
from?
was born in Vilna, which was part of Poland. Very, very
No,
small.
Lithuania, Vilna.
No, it was Poland.
Vilna was part of Lithuania, which was part of Poland, apparently.
Lived in a very, very small little town, and they made pottery. You know, little pots. That was their entire industry. And
The whole town?
the whole town made pots.
But he was a tailor, though.
But
And
he
he
learned
learned.
tailoring, but he had to make pots, and they were very poor. They had about 8, 9 brothers or sisters. They all lived in one room. And my mother came from the Ukraine, where they had to get out because every other day the pogrom, they would come marching into town like an Anatevka, and they would have to get out, and they light the fires in the building. So it was really pretty bad.
So,
And they just lived there. They lived in one big room. They lit a fire. My mother said when she wanted to play with dolls, she would take a schmatter. You know what a
Yeah.
schmatter is?
No, what's a schmata? Explain.
A rag. And she'd make a head, and she would make a body, and that's how they played. And nobody had anything.
Well, Grandma knew your grandparents, right?
Oh yeah, my grandparents came over.
Tell us about them.
My father's parents came. He was a man with a long beard.
Orthodox.
He was Orthodox. He loved me. I think I was his favorite. And my grandma was a strong lady. She led everybody. She took care of everyone. Everyone she took care of. And she lived a long time, my grandma.
What was
That's
her
who
name?
Ellen was named for.
her name was
Chava.
Chava.
And they named her for that. And my brother was named for my grandfather's name was Avram. And my mother's parents were very quiet. I hardly even knew them. And the thing is, in those days, they lived with you.
Right.
So wherever you went, there was always a grandma, which was really very nice.
Yeah,
I mean, every time you visited someone, if it wasn't my mother's mother, it was my father's mother. It was really very nice to have a bubby.
I think we would all agree with that.
Yeah.
Even if you live, 15 minutes away.
No matter where you went, you just walked down the block and there was always a grandma. And the best part is all our friends had grandmas too, so.
So did they kind of move, so the neighborhoods back then were very predominantly Jewish?
Well, I lived on the block for $18. Across the street was all black, but they were the nicest. I didn't even know they were black.
Yeah.
My neighbor was all Jewish. Honestly, I don't think I even knew a black person. Everybody was Jewish. The only people who weren't Jewish were the Italian shoemaker, and that's it. I mean, there was a Chinese laundry, a Chinaman. I don't know where he lived, but
Yeah.
in our neighborhood, everybody was Jewish.
Chinks.
Now,
That is
for that term today is supposed to be derogatory, but
What,
back then it was
Chinaman?
okay.
No.
Chinks.
Chinks.
What grandma said.
I never said chinks. I said China.
Grandma said chinks.
Oh, in those
My mother
days,
would say, and the Schwarze brings the ice, but he was such a nice man.
Schwarzer is black, as you
Okay.
know.
For a dime, he would bring up chunks of ice.
Schwarz is a Yiddish word.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but they didn't mean anything wrong with it.
Now, before we go back into your childhood, quick question: in your house growing up, your parents spoke Yiddish or English?
Yiddish.
Yiddish.
So you were raised on Yiddish. It's your first
Yeah,
language.
but my mother learned English pretty well, so
Yeah, my mother did too, but my father never did. He
My-
never read a book.
But
My
they
father-
raised you to speak English.
I went to school.
Oh, school.
Grandma,
Right.
tell
But
them
you
about
know-
your friends. Your friends. You
Oh,
know,
I still
none of you
have
guys
them.
spoke the same language, right?
Well, I just want to mention about English. We learned English so quickly without this, what do they call it, two languages
Yeah.
in school,
Bilingual.
which I think is stupid. Because you went out in the street and you talked to your friends, you talked English. And I don't think anybody ever had any problem learning English, even though their parents spoke Yiddish.
Well, maybe the teachers were better.
Huh?
Maybe the teachers were better.
I don't think so. Just, all right.
What is your,
Oh, I just want to mention about relatives. As I mentioned, my two aunts, my Tante Manya and Uncle Willie had a bakery. So we always every Sunday we would go there to the bakery. And my Uncle Willie was the only person who had a car.
In the neighborhood?
Nobody had a car.
No.
Do you remember
Only
what
my
kind of
Uncle
car?
Willie.
No
And
one.
No one.
Do you
And
remember
my-
what kind of car it was?
Huh?
Do you remember what kind of car it was?
Oh, no, that I don't know. And my Tante Betty had a grocery store.
Yeah.
Her husband apparently was gassed in World War I and was not well mentally, and many times he was in the Veterans Hospital in Northport. My Tante Betty, believe it or not, would visit him every Sunday, would take
Right here.
the subway down to the Penn Station, then take the train out to Northport, and then take the bus.
It was
To the-
right here at the VA.
And they were still work. They
Yeah.
They had on. It was back then. They had the subway, the railroad.
Hey, we
And the
didn't
bus.
live in it wasn't the Middle Ages.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Oh, one other
I
thing.
took the train to the library every Saturday for a nickel.
Oh yeah, subways were a nickel. One other, my
Where
aunt
do
had
you
a.
think we lived? We
My-
had clothes. I wore shoes and socks.
That's
You wore shoes and socks?
Yes.
Oh, my aunt had a grocery.
I don't know where
And-
you think we came from.
Every Saturday, usually, when I would work in the grocery. Then when I got older, my brother would, and we would either clean the stock room or deliver orders. And we were very busy during Pesach, before Passover, where we would deliver.
I
But
will
when-
tell you one thing though, that there were no cars on the street, but every day a horse and a wagon.
Oh
You're
yeah.
gonna laugh, right?
It's still
A
on.
horse and a wagon used to
No.
deliver fruit and
There's
vegetables.
no red thing.
City.
No, it's. I think it is.
And there was also a man who could get eye cash clothes. But I wanted to tell you one thing I'll never forget. When I worked in my aunt's store, I would, during the day, I would put on, when I was slow, I'd put on the radio and listen to the Dodgers play, and I would have a bottle of milk, which still had cream in it, so you had to shake it, and, I think they were Oreos or something like that, or Malamars, and that was the best meal of the whole day.
We used to have a horse and wagon. There were no cars.
Grandpa had a sweet. You always had a sweet tooth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the doctor said I better cut down on my sweets now.
Was that Dr.
Barber.
Dorothy
No,
or
Dr. Barber.
No, but
who's Dr. Baga?
He's the guy with the turban, friends of your parents.
A paper.
What
He's a cardiologist,
is he?
but she
He's
enforces the rule.
Right.
He's a Sikh.
I wrote a paper about him.
Are those the people coming in to buy the house?
Stick to the
No, the
childhood.
house is already sold.
Al, stick to the childhood here.
You know
No,
what?
John, you can't sit there because he's going to screw up.
going to move it.
You know why my father came here? When they were going to draft him in the Russian army, so he pulled out all his teeth, and they didn't take him.
Every single tooth.
Yes, he came to America,
And then what happened? He didn't. So
He
that's
escaped.
why he didn't speak.
and that's why he escaped the Russian army.
He pulled out his own teeth
Yeah,
to get out of the army.
right. He wouldn't go into the Russian army.
So he had fake teeth his whole life?
Yeah, but not only that, but he had one of his brothers who wouldn't come to America and remained a communist in Russia forever.
Oh yes, and Uncle Neach
Went to visit him.
went to visit him in Kiev. I think it was also Kiev,
Yeah.
and
Do you
when he
remember
went
what
there-
year this was
Huh?
that he went to visit?
This was during the Cold War, because I remember Nash saying when he went there, you had to have a guide to take you places, because they wouldn't,
The light went off,
And-
Alex.
the guide wanted to show
He's
them different places, and Uncle Nash kept saying to them, I only want to see my uncle, that's all I want to
And they
see.
took him to see
And
him.
they took him to see his uncle, and I think he had some children that were doctors or
That's
something.
why your mother couldn't go there anymore when she went to visit with your dad. They wouldn't take her to the little cities where they lived.
Oh, during the Cold War.
Yeah. Okay. I'm
Now
sorry.
it seems like all of your family members were, they were blue collar workers. They were
Yeah.
a tailor, a butcher, grocery store owner,
A
Baker.
bakery.
baker,
A waiter.
a waiter. Who was the waiter?
My father's brother was a waiter and a cantor.
At
They
where
used to
where
call
was
him-
he waiter and
They
where
used
was
to
he
call him the
cantering?
singing waiter. He used to sing in the saloons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was a saloon?
In Brooklyn. So.
Just the way it is now.
Oh, a
On,
bar.
on Amboy Street, they used to call it saloon, and he would sing in.
During Prohibition.
I don't even know.
Oh.
You know, I never thought about that. No. Well, one of them, my mother said, was an architect. I don't know how he got to be an architect.
His son. No, that was your.
No, my uncle, mother's brother, Jake, was an architect. They
I
had
don't
one.
know.
I don't know how. And, and you know where they worked? My uncle Isaac worked pressing hands. And you're
That's
right
was it.
about that.
All right, I got a question here. Grandpa, I want to hear more about your childhood and you and Uncle Fred growing up, the friends you had, the sports you played,
Okay.
things like that. And also touch upon your polio as well.
My wife.
Your polio and how that affected your childhood.
Okay. Apparently, I got polio when I was 5, 6, 7. I really don't remember. And obviously, my left leg was shorter. But I will say this: I always played ball. Always. Stick ball, punch ball, handball, just a football with paper footballs. Of course, I was always the quarterback because I couldn't run that fast. But you asked about where I grew up. As I said, we moved to the Bronx, then we moved from Stebbins Avenue to Bryan Avenue. We had an apartment at 1555. At 960. No. Before that.
Oh.
We had 961 East 173rd Street, because my father had a butcher right across the street. Then to 1555 Bryan Avenue, which was around the corner, around that way. And then we moved to 1669 Bryan Avenue, which was like around the corner from my father's butcher store. That's the apartment I remember most. Fritz and I shared a bedroom, and we got along pretty well.
You did not.
How do you know?
He made a line in the middle of the bedroom. Because this was my side and this
Well,
is
but we
yours.
still got along.
Yeah,
And
we-
okay, but she doesn't. And all of our friends, as I say, we're all Jewish. We played a ball all the time, punch ball, every sport. The main sport was stick ball, and for many years we played in the street because there were no cars, literally no cars. Once in a while, a car would come and we'd stop. Sometimes a policeman would come and they would like to take away our sticks, but we would hide them. But as more cars came, we went into the schoolyard, which was a school I went to, PS 50. And the problem with the schoolyard was it had an auditorium here, so that was third base. And in the back were apartment buildings, all right?
Yeah.
Once in a while, unfortunately, we would hit a window and, of course, have to pay for them. But you had to learn how to catch the ball off the wall, you see. So every Sunday morning, we would come out, we'd play stickball. If you lose, you went out. If you won, you stayed. Sometimes we would play players from another block, Wise Avenue, Hoe Avenue, for maybe a nickel a man, something like that.
How many boys were playing? How many boys were out on the field?
There was first base, second base, third base, about two or maybe second base and shortstop, and maybe probably three outfielders. Yeah. So
Were there like
and we in stickball we hit in the Bronx. You hit the ball by yourself, whereas in Brooklyn, they played. You throw the ball in on a bounce. I don't know why. That's the way it was.
That is weird.
Were there girls sitting there watching you guys play at all, or no?
No.
Nobody was. Actually, I should mention one thing. When you're in the street, if you hit a ball 2 sewers was pretty good. 3 sewers was very good. But one other thing I have to mention, when we played, sometimes in the street where we would hit the ball, the old women, I'm older, would sit on the street, and sometimes they would complain to my father that, Fritz and I were playing and the ball almost hit them, so he would yell at us once in a while, but
I want you to know they were all tenements. We had no private homes. I lived in a huge building with 4 families on every floor, and everyone was friendly. We had 4 floors, 16, 20 people, all Jewish. And we all lived, that's the way it was.
But tell me about your apartment where you lived. Your bedroom was all the way at the end when I met you.
That was the best part because everybody came to my apartment.
How about going to like Giants and Yankees and Dodgers games?
Fritz and I would go to the Yankee games by trolley. They had trolleys then. And
trolley.
I was a Dodger and Yankee fan until 1941 when they played in the World Series, and unfortunately I guess I picked the Dodgers, so I suffered all those years. But my brother was kind enough to, whenever the Dodgers played in the Polo Grounds, we would go and watch the game.
Tell them how much you paid, a quarter.
Who knows?
Where
I
was
don't
the
think,
Polo Grounds?
10 cents for the bleachers, I think.
Polo Ground was up in the Bronx.
Polo Grounds is in the Bronx too. Okay.
Well, no, Polo Grounds was in Harlem, across the street from across the Harlem River from the Yankee Stadium.
Okay.
I don't think it's there anymore, is it?
No,
it's
they
not.
have the apartment building. And football, I think we started to go in 1943, 1944. We would go in the morning and wait online, and we would get in for 50 cents. And the 2 players I remember most were Sid Luckman, who was a Jewish football player from Columbia who played with the Chicago Bears, who threw, I think, one time 7 touchdown passes, and Don Hudson, who was a end, we didn't call him wide receiver, for the Green Bay Packers, who I still consider the greatest end that ever lived. And one time, the quarterback threw him a pass, and the goal line was on the
goalpost.
The goalposts were on the line,
Right.
not in the back.
Right.
So one time he ran, grabbed the pole, turned around, and caught a football.
So like like a ring around the posy type.
And you were how old in
great,
1943?
I was then about 13 or 14.
Okay.
And they went themselves.
We went out, nobody worried about it.
Right.
You took a trolley, or you took, if you wanted to take a subway train, nobody worried about that.
Right.
Parents didn't worry about kids riding bikes with helmets and nonsense and all that.
Now, Grandma, let's go. You, what would you do in your time growing up? I know that, who were your friends? I know you like to see movies and stuff like that.
My friends are still the same. I still have them. We went to kindergarten together. We lived together about 2 blocks away. I still know them. We went to the library a lot.
To read.
Yeah, we used to go on a nickel, go to the Brooklyn Library, spend the whole Friday. We all started with A. And we thought we would read all the books. And then we congregated in my room. And don't forget, we lived in a tenement building with so many people, which was attached to another tenement. And we had 98 boys. It was just great. Everyone would congregate in my room.
In your bedroom?
Yeah,
Did you share with anybody?
Well, before the lady came. And all the boys and girls were there, and my mother would feed us constantly. She was always bringing in food, and we had such a great time. And some of the boys who we hung out with, one of them, Morris, used to tell stories, mystery stories, and he became a writer. Remy is one of them was an artist, and I didn't even know he was gay then, but he turned out to be a ballet dancer. Wrote books. He's the one who wrote Fortunately.
Right. And how old were you at this time, about?
We were growing up at that time.
8.
Okay.
Into the teens. And one of them turned out to be went to Hollywood. So each and every one was sort of bright in their own way, but we didn't realize it. And then my brother was born and used to come in when he got a little older from polio and threw everybody out. They all remember my brother saying, "Get out!"
Nayak?
Until he got sick, and then it was bad. He got polio too when he was 6. And when I went to visit him, the first impression was people in the iron lungs. Never saw that, huh?
Was that a movie?
No.
You know those things, the big iron lungs?
When you had polio, some people had polio affecting their legs, like Nate and me, but some of them affected something, their breathing. So they would put them in what they call an iron lung, where they could give them oxygen.
It was like an MRI that you lay there forever, and it was...
Yeah,
But he made it through.
Huh?
But Uncle Nayak made it
he,
through.
the only thing is in those days, he couldn't go to school, and I really don't know how we went to school, because they had no facilities for wheelchairs, for canes, or braces to go up and down. Of course, remember, our schools had 4 stories high, and you had to walk up the steps. Not like you have now. It was elevators, so I think he missed school, but he did very well.
Okay. So, how about, tell us about, what was your, if you could think back.
Wait, pause.
Why?
We gotta change the disc.
Okay. You're doing,
If we make $1 million off this,
we'll get you the best.
so that's actually a good question.
Okay.
If you try to remember when you were, when
So
you
what
were
do I want to
before
do?
college,
Is it on, Alex?
it's on. Before college,
Yeah.
if you won the lottery
It's not on.
for $1 million, what would you guys have spent it on?
We didn't have a lottery.
Alex,
I don't
it's not
know.
on. The light's not on.
It's
Maybe-
on.
Alexander,
We didn't
I
have a
mentioned,
lottery.
Grandma mentioned, I never mentioned my sister. My sister was born,
Miriam, right?
1937, 38, and I remember going to this small private hospital in the Bronx where she was born. Now, the problem with my sister was, since we only had 2 bedrooms, and my parents had one and Fritz and I had the other, she had to sleep in the living room all her
Which
life.
ruined her whole life.
And unfortunately, I
Ruined her
think
whole life.
she's right. She's still bitter about it, I think, to this day.
And that's why she doesn't talk to him.
And well, now we talk to each other.
Yeah, now and then. Yeah.
Well, they didn't always not talk.
No,
We
for-
spent,
but she's always been a bitter person because of, I think because of that. She resented it.
Well, she lives in New Jersey now. Where did she live?
She lives in Fair Lawn, New Jersey.
And her husband, is he still?
Morning.
Morty?
Yeah, but he's not well,
He's not.
What's wrong with him?
We spent. What we used to go there
Hanukkah.
for,
They used to go there on Hanukkah.
Hanukkah.
and we had a pretty good time.
Ellen,
Yes.
where'd you get this bird?
So the moral of the story is, don't put your sister in the living room to sleep.
Okay.
Okay, now
Now, one more thing about childhood. I want to know, looking back, what was your favorite movie?
Gone with the wind.
Gone with the Wind.
I love Gone with the
Which, by the way, was on TV this morning.
Now, tell us.
yesterday we saw a great
How-
movie that we saw. It was like 1940s, which 1940 probably had the greatest movies of all time. They had The Wizard of Oz, How Green Was My Valley, which we saw yesterday about
You never heard
Linus
of
in
it,
the
right?
Wales, Rebecca, and there were a few. I think the Maltese Falcon. I mean, it was an unbelievable. Now, and these movies in those days were an hour and a half, not 2.5 hours nowadays. But most importantly, when you went to the movies, believe it or not, you didn't wait. You didn't look at what time the movie started because you didn't know. You go into the movie. It would be in the middle of the movie. You'd watch it to the end. Then there's a second feature, and then you wait until it came around to the part that you
Stop.
came in, and then you went out. I mean,
You also
nobody
took-
ever thought of
You also took your lunch in the band, and they had matrons who let you sit down, so they would watch you.
And it cost how much?
A nickel.
A nickel. And you
And
could
I
sit there as
thought,
long as
well,
you
no,
want.
wait a second. There were two different types of movies. One had the first run movies, and then there was a movie that had the second run. By that I mean 7 or 8 months later, and that movie was cheaper than the other movie.
And you also got a plate.
Food?
No, a plate. That's
When your mother,
remember I
our
gave you
parents,
dishes?
Yeah.
That's how you got in the movies for a nickel.
They give you that. And then they gave you gave
And
the
if
plate
you
to
went
the guy.
if you went continuously, you got the whole set.
not us, our parents went at
Yeah,
night.
they went at night for a nickel.
Did they used to get dressed up to go to the movies also, or was
I
it more of a
Always dressed
casual?
up, I don't know.
No, I don't think
I
so.
didn't wear pants, he wore a skirt. And I
No.
didn't wear short things like Rena.
And every Saturday, the movies would have what they call a serial. 15 chapters. There would be a hero, and at the end of each chapter, he would be in danger, falling off a cliff or something. Then the next week, you'd see the next part, where he would somehow manages to escape, and then he gets into trouble again.
So to keep you coming back
Yeah.
to the movies.
Well, what else was there to do?
And
What else was there to do?
Well, we can play in the street, but the movies.
Dorothy, wasn't there something when
First of
you...
all, it gave you a whole new life. We didn't have a radio, and I didn't have television,
Right.
I had a radio.
because he was rich. We didn't have television. He was rich.
Were there
We didn't have anything to do
what
with
news did you guys ever read the newspaper? Did they
think we
deliver
had
it
the-
back in that day?
Delivery, are you nuts? And even have a nickel for a paper. My mother read the forward.
The Forward,
Yeah.
which was the Jewish.
And the tug, and the J.
Yeah.
And that's what I liked last week at the at Gerwin. We had in the tug there used to be a page called the Bintel Brief that people would write letters, and we had a lady, a lecturer, come discuss it, which was really nice.
Do you remember any either Yiddish or any other phrases or sayings or mannerisms that your parents or your brothers or anybody in your neighborhood would say that's
Oh yeah, all the time.
yeah, give me a couple of those.
And we also went to Jewish shows. My mother would always take us to the Yiddish dinner.
And yeah, we had a Yiddish theater also, and my parents would take us once in a while.
You know, the same things. Sei gesund, geh gesund, the gute and the mazel dicke Shor. And what else?
I'm a sugar.
You were sugar.
Oh.
Oh, my mother used to, when we would say, Ma, I have nothing to do. She said, Klopsach, in Jewish was, bang your head against the wall and yell bravo. Oh, clap your head against the wall and yell bravo. And she would give me a coloring book and for a nickel. And you know what we had? We had those the books where you cut out the doll and then you put the clothes on. That would keep us occupied for days.
Didn't they have something in the movies where you got a ticket when you entered, and and they called out your ticket, you won something?
Oh, maybe a piece of candy.
I don't know. I forget. I don't remember.
Oh, Kloppenband and yell bravo or don't bother me. All, you know, things like that.
What about your grandpa?
Adresach dein Kopf.
What's that?
Leave me alone. Just turn your head around. Just go away from me. They are bad.
Get your back, go away.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
It's funny that when we grew up, we didn't want to learn.
And we didn't have a telephone.
You didn't want to learn in Yiddish or English?
Well, we we were sort of ashamed of the Yiddish, so we
I
wanted.
wasn't ashamed.
Well, you didn't realize it, but you want to be an American,
Oh,
so
yes, a
everybody
Yankee.
spoke English.
And he wanted to be a Yankee.
Yankee.
A Yankee.
A Yankee.
A Yankee, right.
Because my mother was called a greenhorn.
What's that?
That's what it was, a greenhorn.
You know what greenhorn means? An immigrant, a Jewish immigrant who came over. Oh, he's a greenhorn, he doesn't know anything. Oh, by the way, we also got the Forbits,
And the J. And the
which
J.
was a more socialist, but as the years went on, less and less socialist.
Oh, here's Lisa.
And it always had pictures in the forward.
They always read the paper.
Always.
Always.
Right? And is that how did they have stories about the old country also in the paper?
No, I really wasn't
Or was it
interested. My
read
mother
it?
used to tell me stories, but I couldn't care less. I was in America.
That's right. Oh, a newspaper, I read the Daily News. mainly because of the sports. And the paper would come out at 7, 8 o'clock. And all the guys, when we were 14, 15, 16, 17, we would stand around the candy store, because that's where the paper was delivered. And the candy store owner, Mr. Captain, would get very angry at us because we were making so much noise. But remember, the baseball games at those times were played at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So you would get the scores and what happened in the paper. So you'd wait for the paper. And then there was always one kid who was I guess you would call him a bookie. If you gave him a penny or 2 cents or 3 cents, you picked 3 players for that day. And if that player made 6, if they made 6 hits, you get money back from him. He would give you, if you gave him a penny, he'd give you 3 cents. So, you pick Ted Williams, of course, or Joe DiMaggio, or there's a player on the White Sox named Luke Appling. But believe it or not, most days you're lost.
I believe it. That's why he's a bookie.
That's why he was a bookie. Dorothy, stop
Did
looking
he,
at my face.
I wonder what he does now.
What, was there anybody in your neighborhoods, not family, that you were either afraid of, or somebody really eccentric that you made fun of, or anybody very wealthy or successful that you looked up to? So somebody that everybody talked about in the neighborhoods?
The only one we ever talked about was my friend Rosalind, who we always felt slept around, but we didn't even know what slept around means. It was just rumored. But we had no idea what it was. No, I wasn't afraid of anyone. Who was to be afraid of? First of all, we were always together. I don't think we ever walked down the block if I didn't have my friends with me. I never walked alone. There was always someone.
What about you?
I agree. There were two guys. One man, for some reason, there was a guy named we called him English. Don't ask me why. I think he may have spoken in a funny way, but we called him English and make fun of him. And I'll never forget, one time he came to me and he said, why do you always make fun of me, all of you? And I said, English, we like you. So, it's not as if we hate you, we like you. And the only other man I remember who spoke really very well was Lenny Harris, who became a theater critic, believe it or not. Yeah, and he became and he was on television also.
We had a lot of famous people who became that one. My brother.
Yeah, that's true.
Uh-huh.
And who else? I can't
And
remember.
Remy. He was well known.
Grandma, do you remember the first time that you heard Frank Sinatra? Do you remember the first time, or what did you think when you first heard his voice?
First time I heard him, I went to the pound and I waited online, and he was so skinny. You know how thin he was, with that big bow tie. And as soon as he got on stage, the girls went, "Oh!" I forget what he sang, and everyone danced in the aisles.
In Paramount, about how old were you then?
Oh, must have been that 16, 15. And I loved him since. We just saw a movie about him. And everyone in the audience, oh, Frankie.
What were you called? Tell them what you were called then.
A Barbie soccer.
Bobby socks. Because they all wore those little white socks.
I think he was I really think he was the best pop singer they've ever had.
He probably was. And he did a lot of good things too.
He founded something in Israel.
In Israel. For Arab and Israeli children.
Yeah.
Oh,
well,
yeah?
he made so much money, don't forget. He was very popular. And then he had the bad period when I think he drank or he lost his voice, and then he made that great movie, From Here to Eternity. Did you see that movie?
I have not seen that movie.
Oh, you didn't see From Here to Eternity?
From Here to Eternity is was based on a novel by James Jones about the American Army in Pearl Harbor, before and after Pearl Harbor. And there was one man, Ernest Borgnine, who was a sergeant, who was a sadistic guy. And Frank Sinatra was he was always picking on him, and Sinatra would Maggio, Sergeant Maggio,
Yeah.
and he would Private Maggio. He would never give up, and
It
Bernard
was a great movie.
and the sergeant would beat him up all the time, and then finally they threw him into the brig.
It was a great movie.
Sergeant
You didn't see it?
Maggio. You have to see
Rena?
the movie. It's a Montgomery Clift was the
No, I didn't see it.
wonderful movie. Wonderful movie.
They
I'll
were
see
not-
it. Take me.
You asked about Pearl Harbor.
We'll get there. One
Okay.
second. Were there any like landmarks? So you remember the first time you heard Frank Sinatra? I remember going to seeing the Empire State Building. Is there any landmarks or any things you remember vividly? Any architecture that you just were in awe back in the?
It's a library. We had the greatest public library in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Public Library, and next to it were the Botanic Gardens. The Brooklyn Botanic Gardens,
Botanical.
Tell me about them a little bit.
huh? They're still here. They're world famous. The Brooklyn Botanic Gardens,
We gotta go.
huh? In Brooklyn, you're gonna creep to Brooklyn, right? To see it.
But we also had the Bronx Botanic Garden.
And the where else did we go? We didn't go in. You know what? We didn't really go anywhere. How did we get? How did
So
we
that
get
actually
there?
brings it to a good.
I want to
Sorry.
mention one thing. Is what I remember: the Bronx Zoo.
Because I lived in the Bronx.
I lived there, and you could walk there, and there was nothing like the Bronx Zoo. Mainly, we used to wait for the seals to be fed at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and
In the morning.
in the afternoon, and the guy would throw the fish, and
They
the
still
seals
do.
would catch them. It was really
No,
wonderful.
you have to forget we didn't have any transportation, and we didn't even have a nickel. Where would I get the money to
So
go?
so that it gives me to the next point. So there's a bubble, a little bit of a bubble within the neighborhood, right? You're in a
But that was.
your own. That's the way it was.
But that's.
I remember when I kind of awoke from my bubble was on September 11th. And I said, holy there's a whole nother world out there. What's
Yeah.
going on in the world? So I imagine that perhaps it was Pearl Harbor that was the most memorable moment that awoke you to the outside world.
No,
Including Pearl Harbor, or maybe before that. Were there any events that made you think about the wider world and what is going on
we had
outside
our
of New
own
York?
world. Our own world was very small, and we remember. I think the election of Roosevelt,
Oh yes, we saw. Oh yes,
and we always saw him in the
19
wheelchair and standing there with the hat, with his cigar, and we. you
not
forget-
cigar, the
We didn't
cigarette
have
holder.
We didn't have television,
Yeah.
and we lived in our own close world, and that's the way it was.
In 1940, Roosevelt, when he was running for his third
Yeah,
term, went throughout the boroughs, and I remember in the Bronx, we sat and waited for, it must have been 2 hours in the rain until
Until he
he came down Boston Boulevard,
in that open car.
Boston Road, and I'll never forget, they waved, I remember that. But I also remember the war, since I was already 11, in 1939, and then Pearl Harbor. When Pearl Harbor happened, Fritz and I were at the movies, at the Fremont movie, and then when we came home, we found out about Pearl Harbor.
This seemed to affect
And then
us.
after that, when we got in the war, I used to follow the maps of where the American soldiers, especially in Europe, as we moved on to see how we
that's
were
it.
doing.
Now you know us.
Huh?
Did you did anybody from the neighborhood get drafted? Did you know anybody that got
Yeah.
called up to
And
the?
then they were killed, and then they had a gold star in the window.
That's what happened when they were killed. They put a gold star.
The parents got a gold star, and they hung in your window so you would know that you lost someone.
So
Did
they
your
were
Did
Jewish.
your 2 cousins go to war?
Yeah, he was in the Navy, but they came home.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's good. I got an event I want to touch
So
on.
did they? So they were in the Navy.
It was my mother's sister, my first cousin, my mother's sister's children, and I want you to know how the Army works.
He was in the cavalry, wasn't he?
Yeah, didn't you tell me that one of your uncle's cousins was in the cavalry,
What's
never
his
seen a
name?
horse in his
Dave
entire
Levine.
life?
Never saw a horse in his life, had no idea, was drafted in the army, and he was put in the cavalry.
And did he see time? Did he
He
serve?
went all over, but he was riding horses, he really loved it. And his brother went into the Navy. And,
Did you meet him after he came back?
Believe it or not, he had a girl before he left, and she waited for him. Yeah,
And they got married?
and they got married.
He was the nicest man you ever met.
I've ever met.
What was his
Her
name?
cousin Dave and
Dave.
Moish. I have to go further. When Richard was born, when I brought home Richard, we had a
David to get.
I have
They
to
were
tell
very-
I want to tell you
I
how
wanna
nice
hear.
these guys were.
Dave and Moish.
We had a bris for Richard, obviously, quite a while afterwards, until I took him home. And we had the party in the basement of our apartment building in Holliswood. And her cousin, Dave and Moish, cleaned the place afterwards. They were the sweetest men.
You don't understand. My Dave and
Moish.
my aunt Celia was married to a guy who never worked. He was just a wonder. We really, I had a great personality, and he would not let them go to school, so they just managed to get through some grades of school, and they worked all their lives, and that's the way they were.
But they were
No
wonderful
college,
people.
no nothing. Okay, that's it.
But they're not
Wait,
finished.
they're not
They're-
finished.
We're almost done.
You could, if you want to take a break, you could take a break.
One more thing, and then we can do a break for lunch, and
That's
then they can
enough. What else?
No,
do
we
you
wanna
want?
know-
I wanna-
So
we're
if
not
you want to
ready.
take a break, you
No,
can
we-
take a
we
break.
I want to
ready.
touch
We're not
on
ready yet.
a moment that's very important to our people. 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel.
I don't even remember.
You don't even remember?
No.
Grandpa, do you?
Well, I remember, of course, the UN voting. It was in November, I think, of 1947. Yeah, I think so, 1947. And I remember on the radio, they were counting, the votes. And I remember, I forget who was when they finally got the majority, and you could hear in the neighborhood everybody yelling and screaming.
No, Pearl Harbor was different
Yeah.
because when
So
the
they were
president-
cheering.
It was amazing. And the one other time I heard everybody in the neighborhood yelling is when Joe Louis, who was the fighter,
Yeah.
fought Max Schmeling, who was a
German.
German, who actually after all we discovered he was a nice man. He was anti-Nazi. But when Joe Louis knocked him out, and all of a sudden everybody's yelling and screaming.
Yeah.
Because windows were open. I think it was in June, so it was a wonderful time.
The Day of Infamy was the best when Roosevelt spoke.
You remember that?
Oh God, everyone was. We had these huge radios. You ever see a big radio?
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
everyone was sitting in front of it, and he got up. He couldn't get up. He was sitting in a chair. And the Day of Infamy, I think I'll always remember that
Yeah,
speech.
it was
Do you remember
unreal.
that speech?
A date which will live.
In
In
infamy.
infamy.
Right, yeah.
We bring, since you just spoke about Israel a little bit, what was your Jewish upbringing like? I know there's a lot of, oftentimes there was, you were a greenhorn, right?
No, I
Came
wasn't
and
a
you
greenhorn.
tried you tried to become more American and leave the Jewish shtetl behind. But did they still? What was
Well,
your Jewish upbringing?
As I said, we were all Jewish there, and everybody was Orthodox. I don't think we knew what a conservative Jew was. As I say, we were Orthodox. Obviously we kept kosher because my father was a kosher butcher. We used to go to a shul, a small shul on Simpson Street for many years. And then I guess my father had a little more money. We went to the biggest synagogue called KI Israel, I think, near Katona Park.
Kehillat Israel.
What happened is, on the holidays, Fritz and I would come to shul, and if we came late for Shacharis, my father would make us stand up and do what we call Shmona Estres, which you call the Amida. and we had to catch up with
There's the
them.
boss.
But
Shmoyne, yeah.
of course, as we grew older, we stopped going to shul, except on Rosh Hashanah or Kippur. And Saturday we started going to the movies. But
You weren't with
Did
us.
your father stop going, or just you
my
and friends?
father always went to
He had to
shul.
go. He was a kosher butcher.
He always went.
Oh,
And
okay. So
yeah,
it was
he
a
always-
business.
Yeah, he was. He always went to shul.
You had to go because
well,
otherwise
yeah.
they wouldn't shop
Right.
in your store.
That's true.
Where was the synagogue? Was it in
The first
Bronx
one-
also?
The first one was 4 or 5 blocks away. You walk there, and
It
Yes.
was
this,
called the
Already.
synagogue. It was called the shul.
yeah, nobody called it synagogue. It's a shul. What are you even talking about?
And
And
temples, there was no word as temple. What was a temple?
My
No.
dad still doesn't know what I say. Temple, he says. What's a temple?
It-
Grandma, what about you and your?
No, my father had to work on the Shabbos no matter what they said. If he didn't work, no pay. So he didn't really go to school.
What about holidays? Did you?
Oh,
what
we,
did you do?
we,
What was your first of all? What was your favorite holiday growing up?
My father did say every day, every morning, he did do the
Filling.
filling.
Every morning.
Yes, but he really had to work, and that's just what you had to do. If you didn't work, you didn't get paid. So
He did the filling in the house.
yeah, because he had to go to work.
What about Passover?
Passover was nice. My mother had to say them. Made the best things, and
Well, so what was your favorite holiday? Did you? Is
Oh,
the
I
holidays
think,
like today where everybody got?
no Passover when we got new shoes, and gloves, and a pocket,
And a what?
Did
and a pocket.
Did you get together with the family? Where did you do the seder? In your apartment? Or?
I was saying that the kitchen was this big. I
Well,
mean, we
wait.
didn't have all this.
So where
I
did
know
you-
what you're talking about.
I'm
My mother
asking.
had a small stove, an ice box. You couldn't go shopping like your mother does. There was
Yeah, but you had
And
a,
what was the meaning of the holiday to you then? What did you?
we got the new shoes in the pocket.
Okay. And you ate matzah?
Of course.
Okay.
I mean, everybody kept
You
kosher
couldn't
then.
cook like your mother set up a table.
Well, not many people can cook like my mother anyway.
Yeah.
My mother happened to be a great cook
Oh, the
and
greatest.
a baker. The greatest. But you can't really cook on this.
Right.
And what do you think? She had a countertop like your mother had to make things?
But you had a big seder, because when I came the first time and
Oh, that's when to meet you.
When
That's
I-
when my mother took out all the furniture.
Oh.
I mean, how often do you do that?
And then I walk into this Seder, and there's someone who I knew from
It
City
wasn't a
College.
Seder. It was an engagement party.
You sure?
Yes.
I thought, okay, maybe I'm.
Okay, so how about-
I just want to say about Passover. We always had a Seder, of course, and it was always hosted by my Tata Manya and Uncle Willie, who was a real mensch and a very educated man. In fact, he taught my brother and I chess, and we would always have the Seder there, and
We didn't have any
we would
rules.
walk there. Sometimes, it was a couple miles, but you always walk there, and it was nice. It really
They
was.
were rich. He had a big living room. We had nothing.
Yeah, but it wasn't rich,
They had a tiny kitchen. I don't know where you think we lived.
You told me. You just told me where you live. Were there? What were the? Do you remember your rabbis at all?
No.
Did they have?
Oh, I want to say one thing
A
about.
rabbi?
Yeah, what do
I
you wanna say,
remember
Grandpa?
Rabbi Wynn, but they were never impressive. But I would say on Yom Kippur, when Yom Kippur came, of course we couldn't put on the lights or anything. And after we did, in the morning, we would, in the afternoon, sometimes the World Series was on, I couldn't put on the radio. So we'd walk to 174th Street, which was the commercial street, and there was always an Italian shoemaker, and he had the radio on and let us sit and listen to the game.
That's-
And also, if there was no World Series, we'd walk to the Bronx Zoo for the
That's-
afternoon.
That's funny because now we leave the TV on in the basement on Friday night if there's a Knick game, so we don't have to turn it on. And so
You can
that's
always, you can always go to Gerwin and get one of the aides to turn on the line. Because on Saturday, the rabbi gives a sermon, our rabbi. It's cool. You know, he discusses the Torah reading, and he can't put on the light, so he always calls over a black aide to turn the light on.
When-
yeah?
well, a couple more things about the Jewish holidays, and then we'll take a break.
What time is it?
What
They're gonna be here.
did
1:05.
do you remember Grandpa singing? Did you ever sing the 4 questions?
Oh, I always said the fourth.
You were
until